My name's Everett, and I'm the manager of community outreach for New Line Skateparks. They've helped bring in our panelists today, and we're super thankful. As Rose said, this is likely the first of its kind in Vancouver and maybe in Canada. So we're really, really excited to be a part of this and so thankful that everyone got on board. And I'm thankful that you came out tonight and hopefully you take something away from it. Right now, there's a global movement of these conversations happening. We've seen it, some international conferences like Pushing Borders, the most recent being in Malmö, Sweden. And there's a conversation happening amongst the skate community of how to create positive social change. And so I felt honored today to speak with all of you, and every individual up here is doing just that. They're using skateboarding in a really positive way to affect their communities. And they're going to talk a little bit about how they're doing that and why they're doing it and what experiences that have led them to want to give back to their communities. So we're just going to go through and we're going to introduce each of our panelists individually. And then we're going to get started with a few questions and we'll get some dialogue going back and forth. And time permitting, we'll put out some questions to the audience and you'll have a chance to ask anything that's on your mind. So we're going to start first and foremost with John Rattray. John. So he just came up from Portland, where he's living now, and he's off to Tokyo tomorrow. So we're super thankful you're able to make the stop. John is a former professional skateboarder from Aberdeen, Scotland. He rode for Blueprint Skateboards as a young adult before he moved to California and joined the Zero crew with Jamie Thomas. In 2011, John's sister tragically took her own life. This event actually prompted him to quit being a pro skater. In 2017, 6 years after his sister passed, John embarked on an annual fundraising quest for mental health in memory of his sister Katrina. Recently launching the Why So Sad campaign, John is on a mission to bring awareness to the issue of suicide and start a critical conversation about mental health within the skate community. So let's give it up for John.
Kristin Ebeling, there's a lot to say about her as well. I'm really happy to call her my friend. She's a mentor and someone that I really look up to. She's an executive director for Skate Like a Girl, and it's a non-for-profit organization. They have 3 chapters in Seattle, Portland, and the San Francisco Bay Area. We also know her she's a co-founder of the Skate Witches, and what they do for the girl skateboard scene is amazing. So much to say. And I'm going to look at this now. Okay, so Wheels of Fortune, it's a girl skateboard contest in Seattle that she founded, and it brings a lot of women together in the world. So just by saying that, she's a mentor to a lot of people in the skateboard community, and I welcome her today.
So next up, we have a friend of mine, Joel Pippus. He's in from Calgary today joining the panel. This is Joel on the end here. So Joel is a certified child and youth care counselor, and he works full-time at Hull Services. He's been working there since 2010. He has extensive experience working with children who have experienced trauma and abuse and exhibit severe behaviors. In 2015, he launched a project called Push to Heal, and that's connecting skateboarding to neuroscience as a treatment for alternative, high-needs young people. Joel's goal is to continue to build Push to Heal project and eventually establish a skate-based treatment and education center. So let's give it up for Joel.
Our next guest is well known, Joe Buffalo. Joe the legend from Musqueam, Alberta, in central Alberta, from the Samson Cree Nation. Joe formally just turned pro for Colonialism Skateboards this year. Special that he's a survivor from the residential school, one of the last standing schools in Canada, and he's here, and his story inspires a lot of us, and we have so much to learn from him. He's an educator, and he is making way and showing the youth, the new upcoming youth, that you can overcome hardships, and look at him now. So proud of him.
Yeah, Joe. So last but certainly not least is Jonah Bayley. So Jonah's here on behalf of Queer Skate Vancouver. He is a recent addition to the Vancouver skate scene, only having started skating in 2019. But he noticed something was missing in the skate scene here, and traditional skate park environments were intimidating, especially for a visibly queer beginner. As a result, Jonah started Queer Skate with the intention of building safe space for people of all orientations and gender identities, to learn how to skateboard and to build a network of allies. He hosts several meetups a year and has partnered with other community groups to introduce countless new people to the new and exciting inclusive world of skateboarding. So thank you, Jonah. Awesome. So does anyone want to hear from the panelists tonight? So like I said, we've got a series of questions, and we're going to really turn it over to you guys, because it's your stories and your backgrounds that are really what we're here to take part in. So first question is for John. We know that there have been several sort of high-profile events that have happened within the skateboard community to bring light to the issue of mental health and suicide specifically. What recent events have brought along this awareness? Why is it important to you? And how has this sort of triggered this movement that you're starting?
Well, first, thanks for having me. Thanks. It's good to be here and get a chance to talk to you guys. Honored. I guess in skateboarding, the most obvious recent one is the death of Ben Ramers, who took his own life. He committed suicide earlier this year. That obviously shocked the skate community globally. It certainly shocked anyone who knew him well. It made me recognize a gap in the skate industry that's maybe symptomatic of larger societal issues in terms of how we approach subject of depression, anxiety, and mental health issues in general. But it made me recognize that, and made a lot of us recognize that, certainly in the skate community. It was something I'd known already, because I'd been working on this project for the last 3 years prior to that, as you said, based on what happened to my sister back in 2011. But yeah, I'd say Raymer's death recently in skateboarding is the sort of most recent and obvious episode or event that's sparked this conversation further and prompted more action amongst the skate community. But there's been instances of this for a long time. It's just been not something that there's been the opportunity or platforms that people had to work through it and talk to each other about. So I feel good that we're at least talking about it and trying to get some stuff going and learn a bit more about it. But
Thank you. The next question is for Kristin. You promote and host women's only and women's trans lessons. How do you respond to people when they say it's exclusive?
Love this question. Well, I definitely just tell them, you're right. It is exclusive. And what's funny about the word inclusion, which is ultimately the end goal, right? That anybody truly can show up as their 100% authentic self and be there and be skating and not have to change anything and just, like I said, just show up authentically. And unfortunately, like, that's not really the case right now. And so, or at least my lived experience is proof of that. So yeah, when we're thinking about the word inclusion, I like to bring up a concept of equity, because that's like what I'm striving for in terms of inclusion. So a lot of times we think about equality. We're like, well, there's these skate parks, and like, everybody has access to go to the skate park. There's nothing stopping you. Well, that's true, but last time I checked, when I go to the skate park, it's a pretty safe bet I'll be like the only woman, if not one of a handful. So if we think about it more from like an equity standpoint, and we just look at the facts, like who's showing up and where, you can kind of start to see a little bit of the light in what we can do to actually get all people skateboarding. So like I said, if I go to the spot, like I'm usually just like the only woman or one of few. But if I go on Monday nights to like a Skate Like a Girl women in trans session, there's like 50 women and trans skaters like ripping around. So that tells me that it's less about whether or not people want to skateboard, but it was just the fact that just building skate parks wasn't enough. So we had to do a little bit more work to get our community together in skating. And my goal eventually is to get to a point where they're not really necessary, because to be honest, it's a lot of work and it's not easy. But I think we're not there yet. We need to do a lot more undoing of these systems of oppression that have made it necessary to have sessions like that.
Amazing. Thank you. So for this next question, I'm going to go over to Joel. Joel works in a fairly specialized clinical setting. And so for some of us that have a limited exposure, some of the concepts are hard to understand. So we know that childhood trauma is a very complex subject, and the application of the neurosequential model and skateboarding as a form of treatment. Just wondering if you could break down the effects of trauma in kind of layman's terms, and basically what you're up to at Hall to utilize skateboarding in this way.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'll try. I was talking to John and Everett about this earlier, and probably like an hour before this happened, I realized I was supposed to explain trauma in like a minute and a half. So we'll see what we can do. But in terms of a definition to start with, maybe basically trauma or a trauma is something that was deeply disturbing, had a big impact on somebody, and it can be an individual event, or it can be a constant, ongoing, pervasive series of events, basically. And what that causes in the brain in terms of development is a brain that's basically wired for fear instead of for calm. So fear causes this response called hypervigilance, which is basically if you think about when you're scared and all of a sudden you get really keyed up and you're focused on every little thing that happens and you have a bigger reaction to any kind of little stimulus, that's what hypervigilance basically means. And so an example of what that looks like in terms of brain development is some of the kids that I work with are 5 or 6 years old, and they wake up in the morning with a resting heart rate of 120 beats a minute. So they sort of literally their eyes open on the pillow and their heart's beating at 120 beats a minute. And that's because they've had because their life has just been trauma, and the way that they've survived is by their brain being that keyed up all the time to try to protect them, to try to be aware of every little thing. So that's that kid's baseline. The lowest they get is 120 beats a minute, and that's what trauma does in terms of brain development, basically. And in terms of the good skateboarding can do, so Hull is one of 9 flagship sites in the world for something called the neurosequential model, and really simplistically, it breaks the brain up in a hierarchical way into 4 domains, and talks about how you do activities to try to heal each of the domains. Very simply, the bottom is responsible for senses, the next one up is regulating, the next one up is relational, and at the top is the cortex, so basically long-term thinking, problem solving. And when you are in a state of fear, you move down the brain, and you are in the less smart parts of the brain. So literally, for example, the angrier you get, the dumber you get. You don't have access to the parts of your brain that you need for problem solving. And what I figured out pretty early is that, so with the sensory input, for example, skateboarding is full of really healthy sensory stimuli. With regulation, a lot of regulation comes from pattern and repetitive movement or pressure. So examples for a lot of adults or people would be you are stressed out and you go for a run, and that helps to calm you down, or you work out, or even sitting in a rocking chair, or a hug is deep pressure. And so skateboarding is based around, the pushing, or even the pattern repetitive click in the sidewalk. All of that stuff, you're sort of biologically wired to find that regulating. And then from a relational context, skateboarding is good because people can kind of participate in parallel and at their own pace. So you can go to a park and be with other like-minded people and participate socially as you feel comfortable, but you're still in a social situation. Whereas a lot of traditional sports, I was saying it's kind of crass, but if you have a background that's traumatic, you're probably not going to go in a dressing room in hockey and sit facing each other and change together, or hop in the showers later. That's not going to work for you. But skateboarding doesn't ask that of you. And then just generally learning tricks is problem solving. So what we found was that just getting on a skateboard and doing it with somebody who's a safe person actually hits every one of those domains out of the park and is literally healing the brain, basically. So for some of our kids that other things don't work, they will hop on a skateboard, and if we can just get them to skate, that starts to rewire the brain in the direction that it's supposed to go.
Thank you. Next question is for Joe. When it comes to recognizing the Indigenous history of Canada, there is a need for continuous educating of others. How can we do this so our skateboard community is aware of the struggles youth are going through today?
Hello, thanks for having me. I think the only way to gain awareness is by gaining perspective, so whether it's being in the front lines or, where the most vulnerable would be, the most vulnerable, it's like in the trenches, you know what I mean, is where these, the majority of the Indigenous youth are at, you know what I mean? So, and also addressing Canada's dark colonial history, that plays a major role on, and it's still present to this day, on the way we try to navigate our lives and the way history's been presented to us, you know what I mean? So, yeah, if you're oppressed for all your life, you turn to booze, or you know what I mean? You turn to, whatever it may be. And in some cases, it's skateboarding that saves people. And I was fortunate enough to be able to have that growing up. While I went to these institutions that were designed to kill the Indian. They were designed to make us fail. And so to have to adapt to reality after being in these institutions where it's pretty much a jail and you don't get to see your parents for years, and maybe at the end of the year. Yeah, so having to adapt to reality when you're constantly being oppressed is it's not easy. So obviously making a lot of mistakes in life and sobering up. That was another one of the genocides that the government turned on us, was the whiskey. Which is why a lot of my people are either dead or in jail, is because we just got introduced to, we didn't have alcohol pre-contact, you know what I mean? So yeah, it's just another genocide that the government tried to put in place in order to destroy us and my people. So when we talk about resiliency and we talk about, you know what I mean? My ancestors, their DNA is rushing through my veins, you know what I mean? So when it comes to that word resiliency, I like to show the youth that, you know what I mean? I'm going to multiply this feeling, this word, resiliency. I want to multiply it, and I want to show you that nothing fears the government, nothing, the government's not scared of anything more than a sober native, you know what I mean? So especially one that's in charge of their life and educated. So yeah, come at me with another genocide, you know? But yeah, thanks so much for having me. This is amazing.
Amazing. Thank you, Joe. I'm already feeling like I wish we had another couple hours to get all of this in. So last, I'm going to turn back to Jonah, and I know in your introduction we talked a little bit about personal experience that led you to forming Queer Skate Vancouver. Can you tell us a little bit about what your personal experience was showing up to the skate park or showing up within the community, and what has led you to the path that you're on right now?
Yeah, so I started skateboarding in January with a few of my friends who live in Victoria. But unfortunately, going to Victoria to skateboard to just learn is not really very conducive to excelling quickly. So I felt like I really needed to build a community of people in Vancouver, and I had been going to the skate park by myself, and it is so intimidating when you don't know how to do anything, to just go to the skate park and see all these people that are shredding and think like, how am I impacting their space? You feel very like violating to be there. Like it feels like you're intruding on their skate space. So I decided that I needed to build a community of people in Vancouver and a network of people that could come together and reach out to each other and say like, oh, do you want to go skate with me and help me just like take over a little bit of space for myself so I can learn to skateboard. So I did that with Vancouver Queer Skate. I started that, and then have since then met several amazing community groups, and we've come together and done lots of meetups and installments around the city. And we've really created like such an amazing network of people to come together and just skateboard together and learn to skateboard. Because it's really crazy how much people don't realize that have been skateboarding since they were a kid, how easy it is to start as a kid. But then when you're an adult learning to skateboard, how difficult that is. Like, I can't say it enough. It's so hard to go as an adult. But especially as a queer person, because there is so much homophobia and queerphobia just ingrained in skateboarding culture. Like, I totally would have started skateboarding as a kid if the kids that were skateboarding around me weren't so awful, right? Like, so homophobic and, yeah, like, I don't know. Yeah,
Thank you.
Much.
So we're going back over to John. John, how have your personal experiences led you to starting the Why So Sad campaign? Ultimately, what do you hope to accomplish? Are there any leaders in the skate community joining the conversation?
Okay, that's 3 questions.
That is 3 questions.
And I'm going to consult my chicken scratch notes so that we try and hit a few of the points I was thinking while I looked at that question earlier. So forgive me, please. So I'll reference the question as well so I can remember it. How have your personal experiences led you to start the Why So Sad campaign? So we talked about what happened to my sister. She committed suicide back in 2011. And I did a lot of that sort of sent me down a dark spiral of grief for a few years there. I think it definitely heightened my stress response. But then I did a lot of sort of introspection, self-reflection, and realized that I'd been suffering from periods of depression throughout my entire adolescence, and Katrina probably had been too. We lost our dad to alcoholism when I was 13 and she was 10, and his illness had started accelerating from when I was the age of 4 or 5, and then got progressively worse. So I realized our entire childhood we'd spent not really knowing what was coming in the door on any given night, and so in a constant state of heightened stress response. So after meeting Joel and learning about the brainstem, the diencephalon, what's the next one? The limbic system and the cortex, and the way that trauma affects your ability to deal with standard things that happen in life as an adult, that was really interesting to me. I realized there's a bit of that in me that I've learned to deal with, and there was clearly a bit of that in my sister. So that's what led me to start what was the Good Egg campaign a couple of years ago in 2017. The idea was ride my bike 100 miles and do an eggplant. So you've got an egg, it's the good egg, there's a pun. I always like, if there's an opportunity to throw a pun into something, then that's always good. But the idea was, hey, I've got a platform, like a social media following to a certain extent, a small following based on being a pro skateboarder in the past. So I'm like, okay, let's use social media for good instead of for the evil that it so clearly was made to propagate. So that's where the Good Egg started. Then that campaign kind of evolved. I did 300 eggplants the next year with a team of skaters, and we got the Guinness World Record for most eggplants in 1 hour. And then I was like, all right, we've done enough eggplants. What's another skateboard trick that has a word that I can work into a pun? And that was the sad plant. And so why so sad was then the simple question I realized after reading a bit, listening to a bunch of podcasts and watching a few TED Talks about, psychoanalysis and therapy. I realized why so sad is the simple question that we actually need to be able to answer for ourselves and for our friends in order to sort of start to be able to deal with depression as a community. So hopefully that's all making sense and isn't too rambly. Now, ultimately what I want to achieve is a greater awareness of depression as like a treatable physiological condition with open dialogue and targeted self-reflection as some of the most important tools. I want more skaters with more knowledge and skills, basically. We talked about the idea of answering that question, that simple question, why so sad, figuring out where that trauma has come from in your life. I do believe after a bit of reading that any trauma that anyone experiences doesn't come from nowhere, so that the feeling that depression has of being completely overwhelming in a dark swirling fog, it's not coming from nowhere. A really good book I read by Richard Heckler talks about a series of case studies he did with people that had attempted to commit suicide and thankfully not managed to die and come back and gone through therapy. And he identified 3 common themes, which were extreme family dysfunction, traumatic loss, or a sense of isolation, or a sense of alienation, or loss of social connections. And so knowing that there are very specific places from which your trauma emerges gives you a starting point and something concrete and a lead to then investigate and self-reflect and work through with yourself or your friends. I want to get the world to the point where we all realize that suicide is completely unnecessary and we can get through the fog and the storm. That's pretty much worked through my chicken scratch notes and probably sums it up. In terms of other leaders in the skate community, I've spoken a lot to Louis Barletta from Enjoy, who worked with Ben on his board sponsor, Rob Collins from Converse, who was worked with Ben there, and then Rob Matheson and Susie in London, who have started up the Ben Ramers Foundation, which the current project I'm doing with Real, which we'll talk about maybe later, is hopefully going to raise some money for. They're trying to build a network of people in the skate community in the UK, and it's a model that should be able to be applied here, the United States, and the rest of the world, where we start to propagate some more training, assist training, and mental health first response and suicide prevention training throughout the skate community, so that there's more people with more awareness and more vernacular tools and skills to help each other and ourselves.
Amazing. Thank you. It's such a critical conversation and sometimes a hard one to have. So thank you for bringing it up. I also want to bring attention to, I think Chris Haslam's somewhere in the crowd, and he's just started a campaign with Brainchild, and he's raising awareness on similar issues. So get out and when these boards hit the shop, support these guys because it's a really important cause.
Chris, he also sent me a sad plant, so I appreciate that. Thanks, Chris. Your front leg wasn't completely straight, so I don't know if it's Lance Mountain approved, but I do appreciate the effort. I really do, and I love you, wherever you are.
I don't think we're going to critique his sad plan here, but...
No, yes, we are. We just did.
Yeah.
We did.
Awesome. So I'm going to turn back to Kristin. Following you on social media and seeing the work that you're up to, I'm a huge fan to start. But I also know that there's a lot of advocacy and conversation around the use of pronouns. For a lot of this, that could be a new subject. And so what is that about? Why is it important, and why should we be paying attention to this?
Awesome. Well, we heard from Joel a lot about trauma, and we've talking about things like depression. And I know that I speak for more than just myself when I say, like, if you're a non-traditional skater, meaning like most of the people at the park don't look like you, the skate park can probably be like one of the most traumatic places to be in skateboarding. So, but if we do truly believe that skateboarding is an amazing healer, we have a lot of work to do as a community to make sure that everyone has a positive experience. And so, yeah, basically, one of the biggest ways that we can support people that are non-traditional skaters are through the use of pronouns. So, real quick, pronouns are great. So this is my friend Everett. He shreds. This is his umbrella. Okay? If we didn't have pronouns, it would be, this is Everett, Everett shreds, and this is Everett's umbrella. Sounds a little redundant, right? Yeah? All right. Cool. So pronouns are things like she, her, she and her. Those are my pronouns, right? And then there's they and them, and there's he and him, and a bunch of other pronouns that folks have created to suit their own identities. And yeah, the reason why it matters is because one of the ways that we can make people feel really unsafe and they can have a traumatic experience while skateboarding is if we misgender them. So that would be like if somebody looked at me and, started using like he and him pronouns for me, and I'm like, well, I'm not a guy, and then it becomes this awkward situation, right? And I feel uncomfortable. So the last thing that I wanted to share is basically it's pretty simple. One thing that I like to do is when I introduce myself to someone new, I just share my name and my pronouns, and it gives space for somebody to share theirs. So folks that like pronouns really matter to them, maybe they don't pass, maybe you can't tell, or maybe you assume that they're a woman when they identify as a man, something like that. So it's pretty simple just to create that space for folks, and if people want to share, they can. If not, and they just ask you what pronouns are, you can also share that knowledge with them. So simple things, but important.
That's so true. Thank you for that. Joel, in your professional experience, what changes have you witnessed in the youth you work with implementing skateboarding in an educational setting you work in?
Sorry, can you say what changes? Is that what it was?
Yes, what changes?
I think a few things. I think the more that I started and we started trying to use skateboarding as a legitimate treatment alternative and as a part of education, kind of on purpose instead of an activity that we were programming, like intramurals or something like that. I think the more we realize that it has huge cross-curricular potential, that it is something that's regulatory. I think a lot of time in settings like I work in, when we teach folks skills to manage their emotions, it's hard to replicate those skills outside of a professional setting. And skateboarding can be done anywhere. And if it actually has that regulatory capacity, it can be anywhere. And I think before I go down a rambly road of all the ways I think it can be really helpful, a couple quick examples. When the first skate class we did, I had a kid come in and say skateboarding's the only thing that could keep him off video games. That it was the first time he can remember not playing video games because he was going out to skate every night because he was so committed to figuring out how to move forward. I think there was a kid who was really socially isolated, and he was so interested in being a part of the what he understood the skate community to be, and learning and going to a park so he could learn, that he went out and he was lucky. He went to a really healthy sort of community that some older, more mature people brought him in right away, but that was really helpful. And I think for me, what was a really powerful example in terms of the change that can happen is there's one young person in the most recent skate class Everett and I did together who has horrendous trauma and abuse history, and really difficult mental health challenges, is quite young but has 7 fully formed identities, so dissociative identity disorder, and what will happen is a door will close too quick, and because of the sensory component of that trauma, we'll go straight back into thinking the feelings that connected to a previous bang before, and thinking that meant they're going to get beat up or going to get raped or going to get abused in some other way. And we'll sort of switch amongst these identities that all have, like one self-harms a lot, one is really angry, one is really passive. And when we started having conversations in the skate park, what we were told is that that's the only place, or one of the only places, where this young person felt like they could just be them. Like they didn't have to worry about the other 6 versions of them showing up out of the blue, that they were close enough to what their baseline is, that they were calm enough, that it was like, it's like if you've been stressed out for a really long time and finally your mind relaxes for a second, except that's this kid's life. But if they go roll around for a bit, if they go pump back and forth in a mini, then they don't want to stop pumping because everything's quiet for a minute. And I think to me that was a huge sort of spotlight on the potential of what skateboarding can do for mental health if we're doing it on purpose. Yeah.
Thanks. Joe, I know you've been spending time recently going back to your reserve and going to other reserves to talk with youth and share a little bit of your story and where you're at now. My question for you is where are you hoping to take this? Like, what's the next step for you? And what do you hope to impart on the youth coming up?
Well, pretty much I just want to lead by example, and growing up and not having anybody to really like the people I looked up to and idolized and wanted so badly to emulate the style, and everything about these people that I grew up looking up to treated me very harshly. And whether it was, because my dad wasn't around, so these are the adults, and so not having that, the support, you know what I mean, from the lokes, the older people, the older guys. Sure, I had to earn that seat in the vehicle to go to town, to go and skate, but the hell I had to go through at that space in the car was worth it, you know what I mean? So, just not having that, being able to trust someone but not fully trust somebody when you look up to them, these guys are, these guys are your idols. So I just want to give that off that they're not alone, you know what I mean? I've lived it and I've seen it, and I just want to be the person that I needed, you know what I mean? As the people that I looked up to, I didn't know whether to cower or to be myself, you know what I mean? So I just want to give off that image and just that vibe that you're not alone, and that if you're given that chance or that opportunity, whether it's free gear or encouragement or whatever, good words, then it's amazing how long it can go, you know what I mean? So giving the little chances that I had to be able to kind of see it, but not trusting enough to put myself in a spot where I'm going to either get beat or whatever. Yeah, it was a risk I took, and now I'm able to spot that from across the street, I can notice those little quirks, and a little, so to be able to just just be there, they weren't there for me, you know what I mean? That's what I want to do, is just lead by example and show them it's possible, given the circumstances of what the government's done to my people, So, and again, it's addressing Canada's dark colonial history, you know what I mean? Once everybody begins to learn and understand how our cards were dealt, and your guys' revised edition of history plays zero part on the way and how people, the way people see my people. you know. So the more you guys are aware, and the more you know, I'm able to shed some light by doing a platform like having something as large as this. Then yeah, it's a step in the right direction for sure. And I'm very fortunate to be a part of this. This is first of its kind and pretty positive. So thank you.
I say keep doing what you're doing, because we all love it, right? Another round of applause for Joe. Jonah, were there any personal experiences that led you to forming a queer, positive skateboard organization?
Yeah, so I think I think we kind of spoke on that, but I think when we talk about queer skateboarding, a huge thing that we need to talk about is visibility. And what we need to talk about is inclusivity in the skateboarding community as a whole. Queer skateboarding and the elevation and celebration of queer skateboarding can't be done exclusively by queer skaters. We need all of the skateboarding community to be allies to us. I think when you look around at the skateboarding community, it's so overrun with bros, and which is like, there are some amazing bro skaters, but there's also, you have to look and think like, why aren't there so many amazing queer skaters? Like, there's so few of them, but what have we done to keep queer people out of skateboarding, and how can we push them in? And a huge part of that, I think, is just visibility and pushing for more queer skateboarders, because there's not going to be people becoming, like, no one wants to start skateboarding unless they see someone that looks like them skateboarding, right? So if you are a trans woman, having trans women skaters that you can look up to is so amazing to have, like, just to support you. And even skateboarding is so amazing because you could reach out to those people and connect with them. It's such a tight community. But yeah, I think that visibility, and I just wanted to make a visible and connected community in Vancouver.
That's great. Welcome. We welcome you with open arms. Questions? Can I add something to what you're... Yeah, definitely.
Sweet. I just wanted to add something really quickly that I kind of meant to say earlier, but it just kind of jogged my memory that you were talking about it. I think often when, like, if I'm hosting like a women in trans night, or like Jonah's hosting like a queer skate meetup, a lot of times people see that as like being kind of this bubble, like over there, and that it's almost like if you're either over there or you're over here. Like, and I think that the idea of like everyone in the whole community skating together can happen at the same time that we're also having like identity-based meetups. They're not like mutually exclusive. Like, it's not just one or the other. Like, we can have both, and there can be like, we need to kind of start looking at skateboarding from a perspective of abundance instead of scarcity. Like, can we have all these different communities coming out and like inspiring each other to skate? Like, that's beautiful. And we can also have community events like this where everyone is coming together. So I just wanted to share that because I think it often feels like so black and white. And in my opinion, I think everything can be happening at the same time. And as Jonah said, like, it's on the whole community to support and make sure that truly everyone can show up.
That's a great addition to the conversation. So the next few questions we're going to kind of open up to the group and just call for a mic or grab a mic if you feel like you want to contribute to that. And then we're going to have a few from the audience, and we'll wrap it up. So we've seen this conversation expanding around the world about skateboarding's potential positive impact on communities. So the dial, I think, is moving from us being kind of a rebellious group of miscreants and vandals of the past to change makers and agents of change. In an attempt to be self-reflective, there are still misconceptions out there about the skate community in general. are any of them true? Is there still work that we need to do to become a more inclusive and progressive group?
Yes. No, I mean, it's skateboarding. I think that there are still vandals and miscreants, and we are 40 years old over here, like, trying to do something good, and I can't be a pro skateboarder anymore, so I got to do something, and I have a passion about doing what I'm doing, which is great, but yeah, this skateboarding is still run by 15-year-old boys who are vandals and miscreants and idiots for the most part, so maybe not idiots, that's a bit harsh, but yes, work to be done. I think that Jonah and Kristin have done a great job of articulating where we need to kind of over-index and push so that ultimately we can all come together. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think, like, it's such an easy thing to just be observant of the people around you. Like, today we had some experiences at a mini ramp where there were like 4 people going just over and over, just 4 people, but there's like 20 other people standing on the mini ramp waiting because they don't feel comfortable to just go and drop in front of everybody. And how can we all as skateboarders encourage each other to just encouraging the people that maybe look a little bit less confident than you, that instead of just taking your turn 20 times in 20 minutes, how can you make sure that every single person around you is feeling just as comfortable and is feeling just as included and is feeling like they are actually having a good experience skateboarding, right?
Absolutely. So it's really around creating space for everybody.
And it has to be on all of us. Like, it can't just be on a small group of people. It has to be on every single skater. And when your kids are skateboarding, like, talk to your kids and say, like, what are you doing to make sure that everyone at the skate park is feeling included?
Anybody else?
Oh, I was just going to add, I feel like there's a lot of folks, and like probably everybody in this room, that is either has had an experience where they felt marginalized or potentially had an experience where they feel like they're maybe the dominant population and they're like excited to like change that and change skateboarding culture. And so I just wanted to share like 2 things for folks that are like really potentially excited about being allies and helping to support more marginalized folks in skating. And the first thing that I'll share is to talk to each other. So like the conversations I'll just give a real life example. We were hosting a session, guys come, they are like, why can't we skate? Or like, we want to come in, or they're coming and they're just like, we're trying to teach someone how to drop in, and they're like weaving around everybody. It's fairly awkward as somebody that's like one of the women in the space to have that conversation with like a guy that's clearly like not understanding what's going on. But it is really powerful when like another guy can have a conversation with another guy about like, hey bro, like chill out for a sec, this is what they're doing. So I just wanted to share that like folks listen to people that look like them, but especially like people listen to men in skateboarding and men that are good at skateboarding. So if you feel like you're somebody that has like a sense of power or like leadership in the community, or you have social leverage, or you're just really good, just know that you have that power and privilege to kind of step up and have those conversations where folks like myself or Jonah may not have the ability to do that.
Thank you. I just want to share with you as well that when I was asked to do this, it really hit close to home. Having my sister commit suicide this year was really hard for me to overcome. And skateboarding really helped me get through that. And my friends, and it's been a good healing process for me. So this next question, I really wanted to make an impact when you guys all leave here today to take away something. So the next question is, if you could give one piece of advice to help someone speak out about their own mental illness, what would it be?
I think it's really hard to... in my experience, there's more emotional connection to mental health in a lot of cases than there is to physical health. There's more emotional connection to anxiety typically than there is for breaking your leg, other than the initial outburst, whatever that may look like when you realize your leg is broken. And emotions cause us to be less rational. But if I feel like if we can convince ourselves that having a mental health concern is like a physical health concern, then we'll talk way more openly about it. And Kristin brought this up earlier, and it's been a sort of a pattern of the conversation as we've gotten to hang out this last couple of days, which has been awesome. But the comment earlier was about, talking about, oh, what are you doing? Oh, I can't hang out because I'm going to therapy. And that being something that was powerful in terms of normalizing that. And we don't talk about like how somebody would say they can't hang out because they're going to physio. But that's really normal. And I think the reality is that we treat mental health, or we should be treating mental health the same way we do physical health. The same kind of healing has to happen. And even as someone who is a professional in the field, I don't talk about it like that because I'm trying to be sensitive sometimes, or because it's not how everyone else is talking about it. But I think, like we were talking about the power of language earlier, I think that has a huge impact, is just normalize it. Like that doesn't belittle how hard it is. That doesn't belittle the work that needs to be done, but it does make someone more comfortable seeking help that they need, or talking to somebody about what's going on. So I think that would be my takeaway, is anything you can do to normalize it, please do that.
Yeah, I've wrestled with this one a lot. After something like that happens to your sister or anyone close to you, you obviously do you do the hindsight, and you think, what could I have done? What did I miss? How did I miss that? I think something that we've talked about is the idea of moving forward. It's okay to be direct in talking about mental health issues. Like you were saying, normalize it so that we can speak about it the same as we could speak about a broken collarbone would be a great place to get to. I think we're moving in that direction. But yeah, being direct, asking, hey, are you thinking about suicide is okay if you are really concerned with somebody. And the more that we learn and speak about this stuff more often, the better we'll get at recognizing the actual warning signs and not having to hindsight them. So.
Amazing. So we have the panelists here, and you've heard a little bit about their perspective, but I want to kind of turn it over. We're going to have a few questions from just out in the audience. So if you're feeling like there's something on your mind and you've got them up here, let's get a little bit of a dialogue going or a conversation, and then we'll kind of wrap up. So if you just want to put your hand up, I'm going to come out with the mic, and yeah, we'll start down here, and I'll try to make my way back there.
So, Jeff Cole, Vancouver Skateboard Coalition. Thank you so much tonight. This was absolutely amazing. My question tonight is one thing that is a little selfish, I guess. As the Vancouver Skateboard Coalition, one thing that we could do from each of you to make our organization and what we do better, including each of your agendas, I guess. That was, I guess, the question. One thing.
I could start on that. I think
one thing, Jonah.
Yeah. Well, I think that just making sure that you're treating queer women, like any sort of minority, the same as you would treat the pro skater long ollie competition. It's so important to make sure that you're not separating and making those events and activations feel like they're less important to the community than the pro skaters who are doing the longest ollie. Because having new people come into the sport and see that the queer skateboarding event is getting overrun by kids and bros who just want to skate on the easier obstacles is not going to help with building a community and bringing new people into the sport. So, and just like, there's no reason why it should be harder to activate a space as a queer community than it is to activate a space as an ollie competition.
All right. What was the question again? Oh, the one thing would just be to just continue educating everybody, the misinformed, the non-native or whatever, is like, yeah, everybody needs to know history, and how Canada was formed and what it took in order for this, this country to be where it's at right now. Everybody needs to sit down and seriously do some research and educate yourselves, because how you guys were taught in school is not how it was for real, And yeah, if I could continue educating people and showing them, good could come out of all this, then that's what I'd like to pass on to everybody. Keep that tradition going, and culture strong, so.
Yeah, I don't know the breadth of what the Skate Coalition does in Vancouver, not living here, but yeah, education, I would just back that up as well. Like, it's really amazing to see such a turnout for an event like this that's been done through the skate community, so there's clearly appetite for it, and there's a lot of good resources out there that Joe is very familiar with as he's a professional in the field, to help educate people more about how to approach mental health problems and how to deal with and talk about depression, anxiety, and trauma. And I don't know, there's lots of opportunity to do that outside of long ollie competitions, and yeah.
Yeah, I just would say I think a lot of really amazing work is being done related to social and cultural issues and mental health, and I think putting those front and center is really helpful in terms of there's a bit of community breakdown maybe that needs to happen to have the proper foundation so it can be built broader and stronger. And I think I think the prioritizing of things, of what's actually important, is a good way to do that. And I think it's also a really good tool for advocacy as you look at to do things like have space on Granville Island, to have events to say, listen, we're not just, we don't just need a dry spot for skaters. We want to, these are the things that the local governments are trying to solve and confront, and we think we can really contribute to that. So I think putting this kind of foundational work front and center is a really good thing for advocacy and for building the community up in the right way.
My one piece of just thought is, and obviously I'm not super familiar with every activity, but I'm just kind of noticing this overall as a trend in skateboarding. I think it's a really beautiful thing now that non-traditional skateboarders, women, queer folks are there is more visibility now, and there's so much more of a celebration, so much more opportunities for people to look like me. If you would have told me when I was 12 years old that there would be so many women pro skaters and it would be in the Olympics, I'd have been you're crazy. I think, a lot of people have those same thoughts. And I think it's beautiful that a lot of companies and organizations are really excited about, bringing different community groups and making sure it's more representative. But one thing that I wanted to bring up is that it's it has a potential to feel very tokenizing for different marginalized groups if folks like us don't have a way to give feedback or to have a say. So my feedback to kind of the general skateboarding community is ask yourselves who's in the back room meeting and making the final decisions? Do they look like the marginalized communities that you want to represent, or do they look like the same people that have been making decisions in skateboarding for the last 40 years?
So yeah, we're going to go back here. I think you had your hand up.
I'll start off by saying thank you for having this panel. I think these are conversations everybody needs to be having, and all 5 of you are bringing a really good points of view that need to be addressed, and they need to be talked about. And say hi to one another at a skate park is super easy. So there's that. But there's an undercurrent in skateboarding that I've seen like throughout my time in it is alcoholism and addiction. And I think that every one of us here has been touched by somebody or had an effect by somebody in skateboarding within alcoholism and addiction. And I think it's a conversation that we also need to bring to the table. And my question comes to how, from your experiences, would you address or speak to somebody who has issues with addiction and is involved with skateboarding? And yeah, I'll point you out, but I love Joe, and I've known Joe for like 10 years, and he's become an inspiration for me to see this transformation from someone I grew up looking up to becoming the man he is today. And I know he's gone through a lot. So, like, I would love to hear what you have for other people who have been through hard times.
Wow. I guess for me personally, what it had to have been like just having that image go hand in hand with like the party, you know, and what they were selling to us as kids, you know, like it goes hand in hand, you know. But I mean, definitely hitting rock bottom was probably the best thing that could ever happen, because when you have nowhere to go, you know what I mean, and you finally have rock bottomed. It took me having to write down every single thing that I've ever done wrong, whether it be, you know, from a child up to present day. I had to address all of this stuff that I knew was wrong, but I did it anyways. Mistakes, whatever it is through life, and then I picked those apart individually as I wrote them. And then, oh, this is why I pick up, because back in '84 or whatever, you know what I mean? This is why I pick up. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's not even that big of a deal, really. I'm like, well, that's why, well, that's gone. That's fully just, I don't, you know, and the more that I decipher all my unresolved childhood traumas and everything that was dealt to me, you know, it's sure that you know, things don't go my way, I'm going to the pub, you know, I'm going to get a Mickey, you know, or whatever. I was just like, that was my way of coping. But really, deep down inside, there was something that's screaming inside of me that was like, I'm self-sabotaging my successes, you know, and why not just reward yourself for kicking ass, you know what I mean? You're just like, oh yeah, 6-pack, and just a 6, you know, you're like, really, you know, like it's just layering, you know, like positivity over all these negativities that I had, you know? And so as you get to know yourself, as you get older, you get layers and layers down to like, oh, and then you get to like this Band-Aid that was there from when I was 8 years old, and I was mistreated really harshly, and this is why this is my trigger, and this is why I pick up, you know, and this is why it takes 2 beers to call a guy, and like, you know what I mean? And so once I addressed all that stuff, wrote it down on paper and picked it apart individually, then I looked at it and I could stand up and I could breathe, and I was like, I was that guy writing suicide letters. I come from the highest suicide capital of Canada, which is my reserve, Musquecheese. Like, I personally I've walked in and seen people hanging. I've like witnessed people with their chest, you know what I mean? I've seen all of this. And so to be there and to write the suicide letters and to be like, hey, look, this is what I'm gonna do, you know, that's purely because I had my vision clouded, and, you know, my spirit wasn't in check with my culture and my traditions, you know what I mean? So for sure, sweating with the elders and taking to ceremony and being at one with your culture and your traditions and addressing all your unresolved childhood traumas, man, I'm like a completely different person, you know? That old Joe everybody knows me as before is dead, you know? And so this new Joe, you're gonna hear a lot, you know? And it took me a long time to have that understanding that like this is what was dragging me down, you know, being anchored by this this toxic substance, you know what I mean? You can't rise when you're anchored, you know what I mean? And it took a while for me to understand that. And so now I'm just getting started, you know? Joe's got his sleeves rolled up and he's in. So you're gonna hear more from me, you know, so thank you.
So I think we probably have time for one more. I don't know, how are we doing on time, actually? We're going to go right here. Yeah, young guy.
Hi. I just wanted to say that, like, last year, I came to a new school, and I didn't really have any friends. And I felt like skateboarding was sort of like a source of therapy. So, like, I could, like, skateboard and, like, not worry about, like, not having any friends or, like, just, like, have it and, like, have fun doing it. And, like, I also, in the winter last year, I would go to land yachts, and because it's inside, and I would skate there with all these people there that were actually mostly women. So, like, I feel like I started skateboarding around lots of girls, and I thought of it as a sport that, like, was friendly for women, men, and people of every gender to do. And that's really, like, how I think of skateboarding, and, like, how I like skateboarding, and, like, thinking of it as a way, like, that it makes you happy, and, like, not think about all the bad things that are going on in your life. And yeah.
What's your name? What's your name?
Gus.
Gus. Let's give it up for Gus, please. So I'm one of the ones that's delusional enough to think that skateboarding can and has changed the world, and it's because of kids like Gus that I'm hopeful it's going to continue. How's everyone feeling? Let's take one more. Yeah, right there in the back. We'll take one more and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Taryn Kutneu, Abawashta Dugukua. This is something that has been a really difficult thing for me to want to ask, and a friend of mine asked me to write about it, but I've never really felt that I could write about it. And my question is, do you feel like white supremacy in a skate park, like, it exists and has ever affected your experience? Because as, like, a young native kid, also, like, a really big fucking weirdo, like, yeah, you know, it's like I'd, like, showed up as, like, a scene kid at a skate park, and I was like, oh, but I want to do this. But as I kind of grew further, and then you see, like, you know, like, neo-Nazis, and then the, like, way that, like, that looks, and you're at a skate park, and it's, like, nervous, and you're, like, overwhelmed, and you also see this. Like, do you feel like that exists at all, like white supremacy in skate parks, and have you pushed forward past it? Or, you know what I mean? Because also know that there is a lot of people of color that we hold up in the skate community as well, but I've never really actually heard it talked about, and that's just kind of my question. Do you think, like, it exists, or, yeah?
Good question. Personally, I can relate because, you know, being raised in a, like, predominantly, like, white supremacist, like, Canada was based on white supremacy, and it's intergenerational, like, meaning that it's systemic. So straight from the judge, right to the cop, right to the nurse, to the doctor, you know what I mean? The whole system is based on white supremacy, and it continues to have a lasting effect present day, as it did as much as our ancestors did back then, you know what I mean? So for that to be at the skate park, I've had to address this, well, being that I'm 6 foot tall and I skateboard and I'm native and I have zero tolerance for that stuff. I've personally had to address this situation and it didn't end well. But I mean, lessons were learned, and I hope that everybody else doesn't fall into that systemic way of, colonial thinking.
For sure. I'll just add. Because I am a person of love and unity, and skateboarding has taught me that. Like, I have been able to be so unified with this community, and it actually has helped me to still be here, through suicidal thoughts. Like, skateboarding's been the one thing that saved me. Trauma when I was a kid, skateboarding was my thing. But I was like, why do I still feel like white supremacy is still kind of present? I always push against it. I look past it because I'm like, this is where I want to be. So I will acknowledge that, but I will also acknowledge that, yes, this is a place I will always want to be, and that I know that it will always push forward for love and unity. So thank you for having this panel. Thank you for giving me a fucking mic.
Rad, dude. All right. One more. Are we going to get out of here?
Okay, this question is for John Rattray, and I just wanted to ask you, so you're encouraging people to kind of do these sad plants, and when it's funny when somebody sends you a sad plant and you're like, oh, it's not sad enough, and you're like, oh, it has to be more sad. I was kind of like, what message are you sending to those people by saying you need to get more sad?
No.
And
okay.
Sorry. This is an addition to the question. I know that you're a father, so if you were to think of us as all like the next generation of like as you would think of your own, what message would you give us to understand our own depression and what we go through?
You put me on the spot in 2 counts right there, just boom, boom. First of all, we addressed the first part with Chris. The central point there is I got called out by Lance Mountain for my sad plant not being sad enough, which I just thought was really ironic. That it's called the sad plant and you need to get more sad, meaning your front leg, there's a certain form that the classically trained vert guys think it needs to be. So the basis of that stuff is just fun. It's just like, hey, it's all in love. That's kind of the point there of just we're having fun with it. The whole thing is a pun. We're trying to bring some levity to a pretty tough subject to talk about, and that's the point there. In terms of learning about our own depression, I'd say that depression is just a vague term. It manifests completely differently for everybody based on our individual circumstances. So really self-reflection and introspection and thinking like what Joe was saying about looking through everything that's happened to you in your life and dissecting it. We all that's the way to get through it. We have to do that work for ourselves. But as a community, if we understand this better, we can help each other to recognize that. So that's hopefully kind of responding to both counts of what you're accusing me of.
So I think before we wrap up, we'll see if you have anything else you want to contribute. But just getting to know everyone over the last couple days and through the process of putting this panel together, there's been quite a few common themes that have come out, but ideas around creating space and relationships, and it really came to the surface for me. And it takes a certain level of vulnerability to put yourself out and to hear someone else's story. And so when we show up to the skate park, when we show up in our community, don't ever assume you know someone's story. Show up and be ready to listen. Be ready to receive feedback. And it takes vulnerability. So I really, truly appreciate all of you being vulnerable enough to share your story with us today. So how are we doing? Is okay? Does anyone feel like they've got something burning that they need to get out, and this is our last chance?
I kind of have to pee.
Okay, we can arrange that.
I think just like a final remark, like we all just want to have a really vibrant, inclusive, amazing time at the skate park, and no one wants to feel excluded. No one wants to feel like they can't talk to each other at the skate park. Like we all just want to be friends. Like make sure you're not limiting the people that you're going to meet at the skate park, and like not limiting yourself to just the people that you already know, but like reach out to the other people that maybe you haven't met before or look like beginners. Just make sure that you're introducing yourself, because who knows, like you could meet someone that could seriously change your life. And like our community is so beautiful and diverse, and we need to celebrate that.
Amazing. Absolutely. I think the last thing we're going to do, John. So John mentioned he's launching, or he has launched the Why So Sad campaign, and there's a campaign coming up with Real Skateboards through their Actions Realized program. And if you want to show the board graphic, John, you've got the board over there. This is the debut. So this has not hit shelves anywhere.
So I go Everett. So here's the art John Horner did. The question, like I was saying, the simple question that I hope we can learn to answer for ourselves. And then on the other side, we put a bunch of the sad plants that people sent me. I think Haslam's one is in here somewhere. It is. So hey, all's well that ends well. But yeah, there's like this silver foil collage of all of them and a little write-up about what the thing's been all about. And there's a card in here that has some ideas on the back of it about how we can be better at helping each other and knowing what to do when we have friends who are either experiencing crisis or we kind of notice things are going a little awry. And hopefully some of the money that this does will go to the Ramers Foundation, and some of the we'll try and do some work in North America as well in terms of getting more education and resources out there to some of the skate community.
Amazing. Yeah, so we want to thank Jim Thiebaud and Deluxe for getting a couple boards up to us here. We're going to give this board away, but we're going to dig deep into the archives of Rattray trivia. It's going to get, the answers will get, well, we're going to start with a real hard one. We're going to start with a hard one. So if any of you know this right off the bat, then you just get to walk away with the board. But put your hand up if you think you know the answer. Who did the graphic for John's first Zero board? Who was the artist that did the graphic for John's first Zero board? This one we set you up to all have a blank look on your face.
Nailed it.
Anyone? It wasn't Hensley. Are we just throwing out random names right now? Who's an artist? Okay. Maybe a little more relevant. We'll see. What was the title of the first Blueprint video featuring John Rattray? Yeah, no phones allowed. What was the title? Blueprint, that was like the first video that should have made it over here, right? Clearly nobody watched it. I'm sorry, John, you're in the wrong part of North America.
The artist was Foz, Mark Foster, that does heroin skateboards. The video is waiting for the world.
Okay, a little closer. Please tell me we can do this one. Please tell me we got this one. What was the song that John skated to in his Cold War part? The Zero video.
No dancing. Who said that?
Who said that? Is he right? Absolutely. Come on up. John's going to give you that board, and he'll sign it for you later if you're still around. Amazing. Good job. So I guess that's a wrap. I really want to thank New Line Skateparks for putting this together and getting everyone out. I want to thank Rose for co-curating.
Thank you.
I want to thank Joel, John, Joe, Jonah, and Kristin. Let's give them a huge round of applause.